On Halloween 1966, exactly 3 years and 11 days after President Kennedy's assassination, officials at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., conducted a routine inventory of materials related to the president's death. They were looking for autopsy evidence, tissue samples, bone fragments, photographs, X-rays, and the president's brain. They found the filing cabinet where the materials had been stored. They opened it, and they discovered something that should have been impossible. The brain was gone. Not misplaced, not mislabeled. Gone. Vanished. Disappeared from a secure, locked facility inside the National Archives of the United States. Along with the brain, an entire footlocker of autopsy materials had vanished. Dozens of medical glass slides, tissue samples, blood samples, bone fragments, the biological evidence that would prove definitively whether Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. All of it. Gone. If you want to understand the most disturbing piece of evidence, tampering in the history of American criminal investigations, hit that like button. Because this isn't about a lost file or a misplaced document. This is about the deliberate theft of evidence that would prove whether the official story, the Warren Commission's conclusion that Oswald shot Kennedy from behind, was true. And if Oswald was guilty, if the official story was accurate, if there was nothing to hide, why would anyone steal a dead president's brain? Let's start with what happened on November 22, 1963, in Dallas, at Parkland Hospital. Where the first doctors to examine Kennedy made a shocking observation. President Kennedy was rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital at 12:38 p.m. He was still alive, barely. Dr. Malcolm Perry and Dr. Kemp Clark worked frantically to save him. They noted his injuries, they documented the wounds, and what they saw didn't match what the Warren Commission would later claim. Dr. Perry performed a tracheostomy, cutting into Kennedy's throat to help him breathe. But before he made the incision, Perry documented what he saw: a small wound in the anterior front of Kennedy's throat, an entry wound. Dr. Charles Crenshaw, who was also in Trauma Room 1, later wrote in his book that the doctors believed Kennedy had been shot from the front. The throat wound looked like an entrance wound, and the massive head wound, the back of Kennedy's skull blown out, looked like an exit wound. Think about that. Entrance, wound in the front. Exit, wound in the back. That means the bullet came from the front, from Dealey Plaza, from the grassy knoll, not from behind, not from the Texas School Book Depository, not from Lee Harvey Oswald. But before the Parkland doctors could document their findings properly, the Secret Service did something extraordinary. They seized Kennedy's body, by force. Under Texas law, any homicide requires a local autopsy. The Dallas County Medical Examiner, Dr. Earl Rose, insisted on performing the autopsy immediately. It was the law. Kennedy had been murdered in Dallas. The autopsy had to be conducted in Dallas. But Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman refused. He drew his weapon. He told Dr. Rose, "We are removing the body now." And they did. Kennedy's body was loaded onto Air Force One and flown to Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland, away from Dallas, away from independent pathologists, away from anyone who might discover the truth. At 7:35 p.m. on November 22, 1963, just hours after the assassination, the autopsy began at Bethesda Naval Hospital. The pathologists were Commander James Humes and Commander J. Thornton Boswell. Neither was a forensic pathologist. Neither had experience with gunshot wounds. Neither was qualified to conduct this autopsy. And it showed. The autopsy was a disaster, a botched, compromised, manipulated disaster. According to FBI agent Francis X. O'Neill, who was present in the autopsy room, more than half of Kennedy's brain was missing. Destroyed by the bullet. O'Neill watched as doctors removed what remained of the brain and placed it in a white jar. The doctors noted in their official autopsy report, "The brain is preserved and removed for further study." Further study. Because the brain was the key. The brain would show the bullet's trajectory, entry wounds, exit wounds, fragmentation patterns, everything needed to prove whether Kennedy was shot from behind, as the Warren Commission would claim, or from the front. The brain was placed in a stainless steel container with a screw-top lid. The container was labeled, sealed, and turned over to the Secret Service for safekeeping. But here's where it gets suspicious. Very suspicious. Admiral George Berkeley, Kennedy's personal physician, took possession of the brain. In April 1965, 18 months after the assassination, Berkeley transferred the brain and other autopsy materials to Evelyn Lincoln, Kennedy's former personal secretary. Lincoln was working at the National Archives, organizing Kennedy's presidential papers. The brain was stored in a secure room under Lincoln's supervision, along with tissue samples, bone fragments, microscopic slides, all the biological evidence. And then, sometime between April 1965 and October 1966, it all disappeared. When forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht visited the National Archives in 1972 to examine the autopsy evidence, he expected to see the brain. He had a list, an official inventory. The inventory included stainless steel container containing gross material, but when Wecht asked to see it, archivists told him it wasn't there. The container was gone. The brain was gone. The tissue slides were gone. Everything. Wecht was stunned. He was a critic of the Warren Commission. He believed there had been a conspiracy. And now, the single most important piece of physical evidence, the evidence that would prove the bullet's trajectory, had vanished. How does a president's brain disappear from the National Archives, the most secure document repository in the United States, a facility with guards, locked vaults, inventory systems, chain of custody protocols? Answer: it doesn't disappear. It's stolen by someone with access, someone with authority, someone who knew what the brain would prove. So who took it? And why? According to Evelyn Lincoln, in government interviews conducted years later, the brain was delivered to a representative of Senator Robert F. Kennedy in 1965. Robert Kennedy, the president's brother, the Attorney General, took possession of his brother's brain and never gave it back. James Swanson, author of End of Days: The Assassination of John F. Kennedy, investigated this claim extensively. His conclusion: Robert Kennedy took the brain, not to hide evidence of a conspiracy, but to hide evidence of something else. John F. Kennedy's health. Swanson argues that JFK was far sicker than the American public knew. Addison's disease, chronic back pain, stomach problems, and medications. Lots of medications, steroids, painkillers, stimulants, drugs that would have shocked voters if they knew. Kennedy projected an image of youth and vigor, Camelot, the young, healthy president, but it was a lie. Kennedy was chronically ill, and his brain, preserved in formaldehyde, available for examination, might have revealed the extent of his drug use. So, according to Swanson, Robert Kennedy took the brain to protect his brother's legacy, to preserve the myth, to prevent future researchers from discovering how sick JFK really was. It's a plausible theory, compelling, even sympathetic. But there's a problem. A huge problem. If the brain was taken to hide medical information, why take the tissue slides? Why take the bone fragments? Why take the microscopic samples? Those materials wouldn't reveal drug use. They would reveal bullet trajectories, and that's what conspiracy theorists believe. The brain was stolen to hide the truth about the assassination, because the brain would prove Kennedy was shot from the front. Let's talk about the ballistic evidence, because this is where the story gets damning. The Warren Commission concluded that Kennedy was hit by 2 bullets, both fired from behind, both fired from the 6th floor of the Texas school. Book depository. Both fired by Lee Harvey Oswald. The first bullet, according to the commission, entered Kennedy's upper back, exited his throat, then hit Governor Connally, shattering Connally's rib, breaking his wrist and lodging in his thigh. 1 bullet, 7 wounds. This is the famous magic bullet theory. And it's absurd. The second bullet hit Kennedy in the back of the head, entered from behind, exited from the front right side, causing massive trauma, blowing out the back of his skull. But that's not what the Parkland doctors saw. They saw an entrance wound in the front, an exit wound in the back, the opposite of what the Warren Commission claimed, and the brain would prove it. Because when a bullet enters the skull, it creates a small, clean entrance wound. When it exits, it blows out a large section of bone, an exit wound. If Kennedy's brain showed a small entrance wound in the back and a massive exit wound in the front, that would confirm the Warren Commission's conclusion. Shot from behind. Oswald did it. Case closed. But if the brain showed the opposite, entrance wound in the front, exit wound in the back, then Kennedy was shot from the grassy knoll, from the front, and Oswald couldn't have done it, at least not alone. That's why the brain matters, that's why it's the key, and that's why it was stolen. Critics of the conspiracy theory argue that the brain wouldn't prove anything. They point out that the autopsy photographs and X-rays still exist, and those images, according to experts, confirm the Warren Commission's findings. But here's the problem. The autopsy photographs and X-rays have been questioned for decades. Multiple experts have claimed they've been altered, tampered with, even replaced. Dr. David Mantek, a radiation oncologist and physicist, examined the X-rays using optical densitometry, a technique that measures the density of X-ray images. His conclusion: the X-rays were altered. Someone added material to the images to hide evidence of a frontal shot. Dr. Cyril Wecht, the forensic pathologist who tried to examine the brain in 1972, also questioned the autopsy materials. He believed the official photographs didn't match the descriptions given by doctors and witnesses at the autopsy. Even some of the autopsy personnel raised concerns. Gerald Custer, the X-ray technician at Bethesda, later testified that some of the X-rays he took were missing, and the X-rays in the archives didn't match what he remembered. So if the photographs and X-rays have been questioned, altered, or replaced, what's the one piece of evidence that couldn't be faked? The brain, the actual tissue, the biological evidence, and it's gone. Let's address the other theory, that the brain was simply lost, misplaced, an administrative error. The National Archives is a huge facility. Maybe someone filed it in the wrong place. Maybe it was accidentally destroyed. But that doesn't hold up, because the brain wasn't the only thing missing. An entire footlocker was gone. Tissue slides, bone fragments, blood samples, all of it. You don't accidentally lose a footlocker. And Evelyn Lincoln told government investigators that the materials were given to Robert Kennedy's representative. That's not a mistake. That's a deliberate transfer. So we're left with two possibilities. 1. Robert Kennedy took the brain to hide his brother's medical condition and drug use. 2. Someone took the brain to hide evidence of a frontal shot and a second gunman, or both. Maybe Robert Kennedy did take the brain, but not for the reasons James Swanson suggests. Maybe Robert Kennedy knew there had been a conspiracy. Maybe he knew his brother was shot from the front, and maybe he took the brain to prevent it from proving what he already suspected. Because if Robert Kennedy believed there had been a conspiracy, and if he believed the Warren Commission was a cover-up, what would he do? They'd go public? Demand a new investigation? Accuse the CIA, the Mafia, Lyndon Johnson? No. Because Robert Kennedy had his own secrets, his own role in the anti-Castro plots, his own connections to organized crime through the CIA's attempts to kill Fidel Castro. If he exposed the conspiracy, he might expose himself, so maybe he took the brain and he buried it. And literally. Some researchers believe Robert Kennedy buried his brother's brain with JFK's body at Arlington National Cemetery when the grave was relocated in 1967. We'll never know. Because on June 5, 1968, Robert Kennedy was assassinated, shot in the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Another Kennedy, another assassination, another mystery, and any knowledge Robert had about his brother's brain, and what it would have proven, died with him. But let's get back to the central question. If Oswald was guilty, why steal the brain? The answer is simple. If Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, if he fired all the shots from the Texas School Book Depository, if the Warren Commission's conclusions were accurate, then the brain would prove it, conclusively, scientifically, beyond doubt. The prosecution would want that brain. The government would protect that brain. The Warren Commission would showcase that brain. Look at the bullet trajectory. Look at the entrance wound in the back. Look at the exit wound in the front. Oswald did it, case closed. But instead, the brain was hidden, transferred to Robert Kennedy, and then it vanished forever. That's not the behavior of people trying to prove Oswald's guilt. That's the behavior of people trying to hide evidence that contradicts the official story. Because the brain wasn't stolen to protect JFK's medical privacy. It was stolen to protect the biggest lie in American history, that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Here's what we know for certain. Kennedy's brain was removed during the autopsy and placed in a stainless steel container. The brain was transferred to Evelyn Lincoln at the National Archives in April 1965. According to Lincoln, the brain was given to a representative of Robert F. Kennedy in 1965. By 1966, the brain and all related autopsy materials had vanished. The brain has never been found. Not at the National Archives, not at Arlington Cemetery, nowhere. And without the brain, we can never definitively prove the bullet's trajectory. We can never scientifically confirm whether Kennedy was shot from behind or from the front. The one piece of evidence that would settle the debate forever? Gone. Coincidence or cover-up? The missing brain is the smoking gun, not because of what it contained, but because of what was done to hide it. If this story made you question everything you thought you knew about Kennedy's assassination, do something powerful. Hit that like button, every like. Tells YouTube this buried evidence deserves to be heard. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our investigations into the evidence they tried to hide. Every day, we uncover stories hidden in stolen materials, missing evidence, and the biological proof that was destroyed to protect a lie. Stories of cover-ups, conspiracies, and the truth they couldn't let anyone see. True crime, true conspiracy, true history. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Why was JFK's brain stolen? Was it to hide his medical condition or to hide evidence of a second gunman? Are you in the US, Europe, Middle East, Asia? Our community spans the globe. Share your thoughts, share your city, keep this conversation alive, because some evidence gets lost, some evidence gets misplaced, but some evidence, like a president's brain, gets stolen on purpose by people who knew exactly what it would prove. Thank you for watching. And remember, history doesn't repeat, but it echoes. The brain is gone. The tissue is gone. The bone fragments are gone. All the biological evidence that would prove the trajectory, gone. JFK's brain. Removed November 22, 1963, stored at the National Archives, given to Robert Kennedy's representative in 1965, missing since 1966, never found. The question isn't where it is. The question is, what did it prove? And who was desperate enough to steal it? Halloween, 1966. The day the National Archives discovered the president's brain was missing. The day the last piece of physical proof vanished. The day the cover-up became permanent. If Oswald was guilty, the brain would prove it. If there was no conspiracy, the brain would confirm it. If the Warren Commission was right, the brain would vindicate it. But instead, someone stole it and buried the truth forever. The missing brain, the stolen evidence, the proof they couldn't let anyone see.